I believe that, that is true. And as I mentioned last week, when I did my thesis, and as I said, or when I did my research, I interviewed folks around regulation. And it wasn't in this space, it was in cyber. But it was something that came up, was that it would hinder innovation. Um, it would, potentially hinder innovation, which is, obviously not great. Um, there's that sort of trade-off, right, between that sort of innovation and the risks that it's sort of, mitigating. But if you look at, I don't know if you had a chance to look at the ACS article and some of the other stuff that's happened, that is certainly something that's been raised as well. So it's a case of, if you put in, effectively, these hurdles, it slows things down. So um, that's the general view. It seems to be a pretty common view, I think, from folks that I've spoken to and what I've read. But I don't know what the actual percentage cost is. It'd be interesting to look at that, actually. It'd be interesting to see just how much of a impact it is to say, well, if we put in regulation, that means that we create, or we deal with, mitigating risks, and which is good, but yeah, at what cost? So I'd certainly, if anyone does stumble across that, please send it to me, because I'd love to see that. I kind of want to know what it is too.
Yeah, I mean, I would be given to wonder as well, if we're talking about cost, is it purely monetary cost? Because, acting without regulation, potentially there are other kinds of costs that may or may not be financial or financially quantifiable, but,
Hmm.
human costs and things like that as well. And it's hard to quantify.
Hmm.
Um, uh, okay, we've got a fairly procedural question. So someone's asking if things like the VAISS and EU standards, etc., are going to be present in the exams, as many of us are not from these regions and may not be interested in answering questions related to this. Is that something that you're able to let people know?
What's on the test?
Well, no. Is it something that people should be specifically familiar with, I suppose?
Um, Look, I'm going to say we're not to the level of depth that we covered. Let's put it that way. In fact, if I look at any of the, as I said, I've got a short list of um, like industry certifications that I've collected over the years, and a lot of them require that. Like, so for example, SIPM, which is the privacy one, CISP, which is the information security one. A lot of them require, you know, that you're aware that something exists, and maybe at a very, very 30,000 foot level, what it is. But there's not going to be any questions about, for example, I'll throw one out there. Which of these is, one of the 10 mandatory guardrails? That's not going to be a question. Does that help? It'll just be, yeah, it'd be much more high level than that. So, for example, I'm going to do that because I might just give you but you know what I mean. So it's going to be a lot higher level than that. It's going to be very much at that top level. Um, you know, maybe the VRSS is the answer, sort of thing.
Absolutely. So we've got another question asking, from your experience in the field, do you think that currently companies are taking these frameworks into account, or are they more interested in gaining an edge in the market and will consider the frameworks later? I suppose that's probably more applicable to places where the frameworks are voluntary, but also do you think that there are many companies skirting the regulations in places like the EU where they're a bit more mandated?
I'm not sure that they're skirting them. Where is that question?
It is from Summary Fernandez.
Got it. Yeah. So got it. Yeah. So I think this is an interesting one. So with AI, I think it's fair to say the horse is bolted. There's a lot of, and it's interesting because I had a conversation with one of the certification bodies a couple of weeks ago, asking me a similar question. They said, are you finding that many are almost just kind of scrambling now? I'm like, yeah, pretty much. So, what I'm seeing is when 2022 came around and ChatGPT came out, and don't get me wrong, people were using AI technologies before that, when we know that. And they were more, I guess, more structured in use. Like people were using ML to build models and to do things, but it was very much contained to kind of smaller, um, when I say not small, not small organizations or anything, but like, specific use cases. That's the word I was looking for. And they did tend to comply with things like, privacy laws and all that sort of stuff. And so that was fine. And then 2022 came about, and and I think it was around September. It was around this time, wasn't it? So what, like 3 years ago now? And ChatGPT kind of exploded, and then everyone just started using it. And I think at that point, that's where the momentum really, really kind of took off, and it started to go a bit bananas. And at this point, what's happened is, I think, and you like, your everyday, folks like, me on my phone, or, you guys out there just started to play with, ChatGPT and Copilot and all those sorts of things. And off we went. And I think what's happened is there was a bit of a lag between that and then between regulation coming in, by quite a lot, actually. And now it's all kind of, oh my God, we need to do something because, as I said, the horse bolted. The horse bolted like 2 years ago, 3 years ago, and then only in the last sort of 12 months have we had, maybe 12, 18 months have we had the ability to actually try and govern it and control it, and sort of build programs around it. The problem is it's hard to try and catch up while the horse is effectively still running. So yeah, that's kind of what I'm seeing. I'm seeing people are using it, continuing to use it. I think people are, organizations are trying to start to control it. Regulators in certain jurisdictions and so forth are trying to, kind of reel it in, but it's a bit difficult. So I think we'll get there. It's just yeah, it just kind of everything kind of followed. Everyone was using it. Now it's like, oh, we better control this thing.
Absolutely. So actually, do you know of, Nicholas has asked, if you know of any assessment tools that can help evaluate whether an AI tool is safe and aligns with those ethical standards? Are there any? I suppose.
No, not that I've come across. All I've come across is, yeah, literally what we've been going through, which, yeah, look, is very manual. I don't. It's interesting you say that, because like I sit there and think, within cyber, there's been programs that have been set up where, you almost get assurance. Um, and I think what I'm going to say is, you know what I'm going to say is, if you look at something like cyber, we've got ISO 27001, we've got SOC 2 Type 2 type stuff. I think from a AI perspective, that might be where 42001 goes. It's not so much a tool, but it's rather an assurance that someone's, reviewed how an organization has developed a tool or is, managing a tool, and that it is, yeah, aligning with the requirements. So yeah, I don't know if there's no, I think that's pretty much it that I've seen. It's a bit of a self attestation that, yeah, it's totally cool. Or yeah, potentially, the use of a certification like 42001. But that's pretty much it that I've seen. Again, if anyone's seen anything else, let me know, but I haven't seen anything else.
Right. Okay. Well, I suppose let's maybe give one more question, I suppose. One more question before we wrap things up. I'm going to go for an open-ended one just to make it a little bit harder for you this week. I think you've had it too easy. Very much a joke, just to be clear. But Andrew has asked, what are your thoughts on earlier this week? It was exposed that Deloitte admits to using AI in a $440,000 report littered with errors, including three non existent academic references and a made up quote from a federal court judgment. So I suppose that's more broadly a question about, quote unquote hallucinations in AI. But how do you see that operating from a compliance perspective, I suppose?
Um, I did see that. I saw that. I read that a few days ago. Um, I feel like I have to be careful. I'm ex-Deloitte. Um, but look, I'm not going to provide an opinion specifically on Deloitte. But look, what I will say is that I think what it does demonstrate that we've seen, and I think I showed some examples last week, is it does demonstrate that there is definitely a need for AI to be governed and to have certain processes in place to make sure that sort of thing doesn't happen. And, someone actually asked me today, I was so random, like I, go out in the street and I'll just bump into someone and we're talking about AI. And they said, "Oh, what do you think about the use of AI for, doing stuff?" And I mean, it kind of almost resonates with this because I sort of said, look, I personally think, and, this is no secret, I mentioned it last week as well. I think AI, even in its current state, is a really powerful tool. It's a really powerful productivity tool. But it does have to be used properly. And so we're talking about the use of AI as a tool, not the development of tools, right? And so it has to be used properly, and there needs to be things in place to make sure that, risks are managed, that the quality is there, and that effectively that human oversight. So I think if you look at this particular example, I think look, I think it's one of those things where there needs to be processes in place just to make sure that uh, things are checked. And like I can't speak to what happened, under the sort of covers here, but yeah, this is not an ideal outcome, obviously. But yeah, there are certainly ways to reduce the risk of something like this happening. And I think this is why, talking before, we need to start really turning attention to how we're going to manage AI, how we're going to manage risk, how we're going to make sure compliance, and how we're going to ensure that we can rely on the outputs of AI. Because yeah, it's not going away. It is 100% a tool that does help with getting things done, and it can do things a lot of the time a lot quicker than we can. But yeah, it needs to be more like fact checked, right? It needs to be human oversight needs to be in the loop. I'm not saying that it wasn't, but there needs to be processes in there to make sure that if there's errors or non-existent references and things like that, that there's ways to pick that up.
Absolutely. I think that's a fantastic place to leave it. Thank you very much for tonight's webinar, George, and apologies to everybody who wasn't able to have their questions answered. Definitely would once again direct you to those student forums at learn.itmasters.edu.au. We have a very high volume of questions coming through for all of these webinars, so we're only able to answer honestly quite a small proportion of those. But there is a place for you to have those discussions, and that is those student forums. We are now at the halfway point of this short course. So as mentioned earlier, all of the materials, so the recordings and slides, as well as those references that George mentioned earlier, that can be used in lieu of there being an official text for readings and things, can be accessed via that student portal. That is learn.itmasters.edu.au. So definitely a great place to be heading. We will be back same time, same place next week. So that will be 7 p.m. Australian Eastern Daylight Savings Time, the equivalent in your area. And we look forward to seeing everybody back in the next webinar as well. So thank you once again for attending. The recording should be uploaded within 24 hours, and all of the materials from last week should be available at learn.itmasters.edu.au. Thanks to Lily Nguyen for making sure everything runs very smoothly on the back end, and see everybody back here next week. Thanks very much to our wonderful mentor, Dr. George Thomas, as well. Have a lovely morning, evening, afternoon, night, depending on where you are in the world. and take care for the next week. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.